for these expats has many, including my next guest, believing, and I'm quoting here, being an Australian citizen was once considered a blessing, but in the age of the pandemic, has it become a curse? Those are the words of Australian expat Brooke Saward. With work drying up and an overstayed visa, she is trying to get home from South Africa. She joins me now live from Cape Town. And Brooke, thank you for joining us. First and foremost, I'm so sorry to hear about your struggle to get home. Tell us your story.
Yeah, I'll start by saying that my story is one of many Australian citizens stranded overseas throughout the pandemic, so I'm humbled to have the opportunity to speak up on behalf of my fellow Aussies. As for my story, I am an Australian citizen who moved to South Africa back in November of 2019, and I moved here because my partner Andre is South African. Because it takes 2 years to process a partner visa for him to live in Australia, we decided to move to South Africa while he is applying for his visa. On the 6th of March of this year, I came back into the country for the second time, and a few days later, I went on a rhino conservation trip of a lifetime. While I was there, I had extremely limited Wi-Fi, and I only connected twice during my trip. I was following the news to stay updated, but it wasn't until I returned to Cape Town when I realized that suddenly everything had changed. The borders were closing both in South Africa, where we had a strict 100-day lockdown, and also in Australia, where the government announced that travellers should come home immediately if they were travelling for tourism, but for expats living overseas, they should stay where they are. I immediately thought to myself, I need to start making plans to come home, but it wasn't as simple as booking a flight. Firstly, because my partner is here, we have a lease, we have financial obligations, and all my worldly possessions are here inside this house. And secondly, because there were no flights to book. I've been keeping in contact with the Australian High Commission, and I've been notified of only one repatriation flight, and that quickly sold out. So since then, I've been looking for another flight, which I did manage to find one in August last month, and I've been looking for flights since March. But that flight was cleared to leave South Africa with 300 Australian citizens and permanent residents on board, but it was then denied entry by the Australian government. Now, this is because of the flight caps, which are limiting the amount of Australians who can come home to 4,000 people per week, which is, leaving as many as 30 to 50 passengers entering the country per flight.
So as I understand it, I mean, you couldn't make this up. These caps are currently set until October the 24th. Scott Morrison has acknowledged that the issue is important, but he has taken no steps forward. Qatar, the airline Qatar Airways, called on the government to increase the number of people allowed back into Australia, saying this plan is not economically feasible for the airlines themselves. The health minister over the weekend says he wants all Aussies stranded to be home by Christmas. Considering the backlog, do you see that as a reality?
Well, there are 25,000 Australians registered trying to get home. So in terms of mathematically, in the first week of September, there were 140 flights that landed in Australia, and they had an empty 26,000 seats on board. So if you look at those figures, if the government were to lift the caps, this would be possible, but it just isn't happening. And there was a National Cabinet meeting on Friday, the 4th of September, and they did discuss the need to open up the borders. But as far as I'm aware, there has been no answers or no action plan from our government.
Have a listen to this story briefly.
My husband, 4 children and I recently endured a 13-day journey just to return to Australia. We've spent almost $50,000 just to do this. As a citizen of this country, it shouldn't have been that hard just to get home.
Rin is now home, Brooke, after uprooting more than 10 years in Saudi Arabia. The cost of her family's return, as I understand it, 50,000 Australian dollars, some 36,000 US dollars. Airlines have been given priority to business class, but cancelling economy tickets. That, of course, means the most vulnerable and financially disadvantaged expats are losing out. Does that story sound familiar to you? That can't be fair, can it?
I don't think it is fair at all. And in this situation, the only Aussies who are able to come home are those who can afford an airfare of 10,000 Australian dollars or more. Not to mention, we have a mandatory 3,000 Australian dollars hotel quarantine that every citizen must pay when they land home in the country. So I think it's making it very difficult for vulnerable Australians, and especially people with kids, families, to be able to afford to get home.
We're up against the back of this show. We thank you for joining us. We wish you the best, and we do hope that you can get home soon. As I understand it, not likely to be with your fiancé at this point, which must be upsetting. But listen, best of luck with this. And just so that you know, and that the rest of our viewers know, we have invited Prime Minister Scott Morrison and other officials, Australian officials, onto this show. They have not responded to that request. But the invitation, of course, remains open. Well, home is where the heart is, hey? So we wish all of you Aussies a safe and speedy voyage home as soon as possible. And